G'day everyone, I am the man called Kemosabe, the man with a plan from the land down under, the man too dangerous for YouTube, the man they tried to censor but couldn't. And this is my review of SHAKA, with story by Warren Duncan and art by Elijah Johnson. This book appears to be the retelling or possible dramatization of the life story of the famous Zulu king. Fulfilled on the Kickstarter crowdfunding platform, this 31-page comic is the first issue in a limited series. Time will tell if future campaigns can continue to be successful and profitable enough to see the whole story realised. As usual, we'll take a look at the cover, then talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of this comic. The digital edition of the comic came with several covers. Two of them are highly detailed and look like they've been painted with watercolour or gouache. The third is rendered in a heavy-handed, geometric and chunky style reminiscent of Mike Mignola and Doug Menck. It's actually this cover I like the best of the three. All the covers on this book do the same sort of job. They present a pastiche of elements from within the book. They're a bit like a movie poster in that they're supposed to convey a general sense of the aesthetic or the mood of the piece of media, not relate any one particular event within the story. This is a departure from how comic book covers used to be. In the newsstand days, comic books had bombastic, even bait-like covers designed to entice youth into spending their hard-earned lawn mowing money on an issue of Spider-Man or the X-Men. Once comic book shops became the norm, comics had dedicated and loyal audiences and no longer needed the enticing covers. The shift over the last 10 to 20 years has been towards artsy pin-up covers, a trend that I'm not fond of. Of the three, it is likely the third cover I'd be most enticed to pick up and have a flip-through of the book. The first two seem clearly rooted in history, while the third looks like it could be the cover for a Hellboy or BPRD book set in an African nation. This book covers the events of SHAKA's life from the time of his birth until he appears to be about 8 or 10 years old. I read that Zulu boys begin weapons training at 6, so he could be as young as that. I don't know how accurate these events are to his actual life. The articles I read online focused on his reputation as a king and a soldier. Very little of his early life is recorded, it seems. It's not impossible the creative team on SHAKA had access to a specialised scholar or historian who has an in-depth knowledge of SHAKA's early life. The story is a timeless one, an illegitimate child, a boy who should be a prince but for the circumstances of his birth. Born during a thunderstorm, his father, the king, refuses to recognise the baby as his child, but names him SHAKA at the mother's insistence. We jump forward a few years to see him grown to a child, being repeatedly defeated by his half-brothers. Even his younger siblings defeat him while they're training. He is admired from afar by a girl in the village, and her conversation with her mother is used as a vehicle to explain some of the customs that cause SHAKA to be an outcast. He is born from an unmarried woman, and it is therefore permissible for others to mistreat him. Later on, SHAKA is watching his father's cattle when a hyena attacks, scattering the herd. SHAKA tries to fight off the hyena, but runs in fear instead and gathers what little cattle he can. When he returns to the village, it is clear that he has lost many beasts. His father beats him for the loss, and SHAKA's mother interferes. Angered by her speaking out, the king banishes them both from the village. SHAKA's mother says they can return to her village where she grew up as a child and live amongst her people. After they gather some personal possessions, they flee the village while being stoned by the villagers, SHAKA's own brothers among them. The art on this book is fantastic. The line work, proportions and motions are all very well done. Only a few videos ago I was complaining that so many crowdfunding book artists don't use the conceit of thicker lines on figures closer to the camera to give a sense of depth. Then I review 3 books in a row that do just that. Elijah Johnson has a solid understanding of anatomy, and his ink work is reminiscent of someone like Brian Hitch, that kind of heavy, flat geometric shading that gives figures weight and mass to sit within the environment and take up space. The colouring is often vibrant and evocative of an African nation. It mixes solid and black backgrounds and single-hue foreground figures with tonal outlines and some photo textures to create a colourful style that makes the art resonate on the page, even in a digital format. The writing is solid. The author has taken care to eliminate any slang or idioms that would pull the story from its cultural roots. I'm reminded of the language in the Spartacus TV show. In a making-of feature, it was mentioned that the language of the time lacked certain classes of words, which meant that all speech had a funny sort of stilted sound to it, which to me made it sound even more authentic. Similarly, the formal-sounding speech, the lack of contractions, the order of the words used, mirrors the formal way English as a second language speakers converse. They don't know the little shortcuts that organically develop in a language, and usually learn a very correct way of speaking. I'm sure you've seen that very old joke on syndicated TV where a native speaker tells the visitor, "Hey, you speak English good," and the visitor corrects them to say, "No, I speak English well." While the dialogue and the writing itself is very serviceable, the story is familiar, very predictable. Part of it is because it's ostensibly based on history, which we know repeats itself, and partly because it's a classic tale, a myth present in many cultures. I've talked before about that scene in Walk the Line where the producer tells Johnny Cash to show him something, to show him the one song he'd sing if he were lying in a ditch waiting to die. The book I hope to bring to a crowdfunding platform later this year is the IP I hold that I think will make the greatest financial success, the one that will appeal to the broadest amount of people. I could work on some passion project, some esoteric story with deep personal meaning, but I'm here to entertain and make money. And I'm all out of money. Seriously though, funding a comic book is expensive business. So I have to wonder, what is Warren Duncan's motivation in making this project? His Kickstarter profile shows that this is his first project, at least with that platform. Although it also says he's backed nearly 700 campaigns. I thought I was doing well at around about the 100 mark. I really got to step my game up. What's Warren's plan here? Is this a project he is personally passionate about? I would hope so. If you don't love your comic, how can you expect others to? As mentioned before, this book is about the same size as a standard floppy. A physical copy of the book would run me $12 Australian plus postage, and the digital cost me as much as an issue of Spider-Man would in a comic shop here. If you're charging a premium price, the book has to deliver. And while the art and writing are top-notch, I have to wonder how big of a market is there for people wanting to buy multiple issues of a historical retelling of actual events at $12 a pop plus postage. Let's say the book goes for a mere 3 issues, you're looking at about $50. If postage to Australia followed the trend that has been set so far over the last few years, I'd be paying $20 each time, a minimum cost of $110 for 3 books equaling around about 90 pages. Why would somebody support this over buying some huge omnibus of classic Marvel or DC comics? Once again, I come to the conclusion that the crowdfunding model is flawed, but I'm not trend savvy or business wise enough to see how to fix it. So often creators seem to be stuck in the beginning, middle and end storytelling paradigm. This story is about the boy who became a king. He's the African Conan, rebuilding a nation, taking a crown by his own hand. But the whole first issue is a retelling of the painful childhood of an illegitimate and unwanted boy in 16th century Africa. With this art and colour, this solid dialogue and smooth action, I would have loved to have seen an African Conan character. I could see this story, this real-life story, as inspiration for some kind of ancient Black Panther or Phantom XP. I know I have a preference for superheroes and the fictitious. Based on a true story is anathema to me. Snyder's 300 is about as historical as I want to go with my entertainment. If Warren Duncan has a passion to tell this story, the story of King SHAKA, and he has made it happen, he's acquired the art, he's successfully funded the book's production, then more power to him. He's a hell of a lot further along than me and many other would-be creators. I'll be interested to see what else he produces, if anything, after this series, because I like what he's produced here and I want more, but I want a different more. I want their SHAKA to stumble into a cave and inherit a magic crown that gives him superpowers. I want him to use a magic spear to slay African-themed kaiju, or find an amulet that lets him become the African Billy Batson. Anything but a well-drawn recount of actual events. A teacher in art school made the point one time that with the advent of the camera, artists were free. No longer were they forced to work within the realms of the realistic to act as record keepers and visual documenters of all things. The camera produces an image more realistic than even the most talented artist can create, so why aim for realism? Why worry about making a picture seem as real as possible when anybody with a cell phone can outdo you with the click of a button? This teacher argued because of the proliferation of the camera, artists were free to pursue all manner of inspiration and push the elements of design as far as they can go. I feel like the same is true of strictly historical media. I agree that forgetting the past is likely to doom you to repeat it at some point, but I don't know if I can see the point in retelling these stories in this format unless it's to scratch your own itch, to satisfy some inner desire to see your interest or passion on the page. I guess I just wanted to see something else. If Warren Duncan was lying in a ditch dying, is this the comic he would have regretted not making? Is this an attempt to fill the gaps in what's known about SHAKA's life, or is this in fact a manageable, achievable project and goal that he intends to complete to create a solid foundation on which he intends to build something of greater significance? I don't know. I guess I'll wait and see.